Good morning. On this Palm Sunday, we are gathered here at St. Michael's. I'm sitting here with Bob Perry and Kathy Crawford. I'm reminded on a day like today, as we think about the study that we've been involved in beginning on March 1st with the book Love Wins, of the importance of grace and what that means to us as Christians. That God's love for us is so broad and wide, more than we can even begin to imagine. And that love begins to manifest itself in our lives as Christians in so many different ways. Ways that not all of us are familiar with here or aware of, that is, at this church, at St. Michael's. But this morning, I wanted to take a few minutes to just highlight the ministry that continues, even though we are on a pause in our lives at this moment, in this country, in this world. This circle of welcome, the refugee ministry here at St. Michael's, is alive and well. And we should be very proud of what's happening. And Bob and Kathy are very much at the center of this. And this morning, we welcome them here at St. Michael's to share their experience in what is taking place. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So Bob and Kathy, you have been so intricately involved in the refugee ministry, Circle of Welcome. It's been a little bit over a year now since St. Michael's stepped up and formed the Circle of Welcome. Tell us a little bit about what it was like in the beginning and what this past year has been like.
It was wonderful to meet Dusabe and her three sons as they came off the plane here at Raleigh-Durham International, and to be there with Michelle Murphy and Robert Fruworth, and it was just amazing to be there with them and to welcome them into this country for the first time, bring them to their home, help them get set up. There were a lot of hands on deck, and that's one of the reasons that we signed on to this activity, because there were a large group of interested people here at the church at St. Michael's who wanted to help out on this.
And Kathy, tell us where the family's from?
The family is from a refugee camp in Rwanda, Gahimbe refugee camp. The mother was a refugee from the Congo. When she was 19 years old, she fled for her life, and I think there was a lot of chaos before that. And she was been in a refugee camp for 20 years till she finally got resettled here, and her husband is still there in Rwanda in a refugee camp waiting to come. The families often will split to increase their chances of getting resettled.
So Bob and Kathy, tell me, what was it like in the beginning once the family arrived? Individually, tell us the ages and their names, and what was it like helping them transition here into the United States?
It was a lot of it was unpredictable. You know, the mother, his name is Dusabe Nyiranzana, and the three children are now, PTA is just, they turned 13, all children have birthdays in November. So he turned 13 in November, and Cedric turned 10, and Frankie turned 4. And they're very engaging, upbeat people. But there's so much they didn't know just about living here that we took for granted. For example, one morning very early, we got a phone call. This is like their first week here. That they locked themselves out of the bathroom. And of course they didn't know any neighbors to go to. And so we go over, and it was just the kind of lock, you know, where you turn a little thing in the knob, and Bob was able to fix it. But that's, so there's all kinds of funny little stories like that in the beginning, but they were always welcomed us and everyone that wanted to help them. It was really a very interesting introduction to a new culture. Somebody coming, and I felt, at some point, I was talking to somebody in a group, and I said, you know, I feel like I'm in Africa, traveling around Africa. And the other person's response was, I do too, and I've actually been to Africa. So I think we all found it very intriguing and rewarding and interesting. Sometimes pretty demanding of our times in the early days.
What kind of things did you have to do in the early days to help them feel more comfortable? I mean, I imagine the challenges. I mean, what I've heard, I mean, language was a barrier, and I imagine school. There were a number of things that really come into play, I imagine.
Imagine coming from equatorial Africa straight to this country, and it's March, and they're still cool weather. They didn't quite know what to make of that. We have to get them sweaters and coats right away. They've never worn things like that before. Refrigeration is new to them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't put a gallon of milk in a cupboard. You have to put it in a refrigerator, and what does that do? These are all things when you teach them. Things we take for granted were not known to them. So a lot of that initial time was teaching just very fundamental things. How do you get groceries? Where do you get groceries? What do you buy with your with money? I mean, and what keeps and what doesn't keep, and what's available, and what are they familiar with that we're familiar with that they don't know about? And it was just a whole very deep process of teaching fundamental things, in addition to trying to instill language very early on. Now the three kids have picked up English pretty quickly, especially the youngest, Frankie, 4. He's coming along. He doesn't have an accent or anything. The 2 older brothers have some accent, but they're picking up language quickly. And the mom is taking English as a second language courses up until recently at Wake Tech Community College. So all have been making strenuous efforts to pick up as much English as quickly as possible.
Now, my understanding is that the Circle of Welcome is we partnered with Lutheran Services, their refugee department, if you will. But the Circle of Welcome here in the church at St. Michael's is pretty large. And then Kathy, you're chairing the Circle of Welcome, and you've got a good number of folks that are involved and that have been involved from the beginning in helping, and it's grown.
It's kind of grown, it's shrunk and grown, and there were people that were involved early on that were really strong members of the group that for various reasons had to drop out. That's not really,
Sure.
They leave for other reasons, and the new ones that have come on board, and I guess it's always been about 20 to 30 people, but not some much more active than others, and it's also dependent on the needs. Well, because of the volunteers, we kind of early on, since we were kind of a big group, had to form teams, like a medical team and a transportation team, and that made it easier, a finance team. And the finance team didn't have to be active for like the first 6 months until the Dusabe had to start becoming more responsible for her funds and was ready to be educated in that way. But so we really appreciate, and not just help from people in this church. People like First Presbyterian Church, their daycare offered the 3-year-old a scholarship to begin with, because the county funding for preschool was not active at that time. There were no funds available, so the mother couldn't get work. So there's been partnerships with other organizations and other individuals, and the generosity and charity of just total strangers giving to this ministry has been very uplifting.
That's one thing I really want to emphasize, the huge amount of gratitude that we feel towards the whole group of people that's contributed to this. There's been a lot of hands on deck, and it seems that as soon as there's any kind of crisis or anything like with the current pandemic, people immediately respond and reach out. I want to underscore the fact that everything we're doing is trying to get Dusabe and her family to live independently without having a lot of hands, buoying them to the surface all the time. But it's a special case, a single mom without background in terms of education and English, the 3 children the same way, no job. And then finally, almost a year later, Dusabe getting a job at a local restaurant, Carol's Kitchen downtown, and then the restaurant having to close exactly 1 week after she starts work. She got an initial paycheck, her first one, but then all of a sudden things come to a grinding halt and the family's sequestered in their home, no resources there to depend upon. So now the whole gang is rallied around here at the support circle here at St. Michael's to get food to them every single day. And there's what's called sign-up genius, and people respond to that beautifully by making sure that there's plenty of food coming to the family on a daily basis, so they're not without essential needs being tended to.
So all of this is continuing to happen right now
As we speak.
Even though we're supposed to be sheltered in place, we're still caring for this family.
Right. And
That's
people taking their distance, but they can pick up food at certain spots,
Sure.
drop it off at the door, kids come out and get it, and people are fed, and they are buoyant. They still are the happiest people we know,
Yeah.
amazingly enough, but it's just wonderful to see how bright and happy the kids are in Dusabe despite all of this. We can only imagine what things must have been like back in the refugee camp for this kind of situation to still be something that is not weighing down heavily on them at all.
Sure. Now, the Dusabe's husband, the hope is that he will eventually get to come.
Yes, unfortunately, the numbers of refugees who were allowed into the country were cut last fall, so that lowered his chances. All the paperwork has been applied for, but it's just waiting, and now it's coronavirus. And sometimes it takes 3 to 5 years.
Mm.
The earliest he could have arrived would have been a year and a half after them, but that's, of course, been postponed for various reasons.
So one of the exciting things that happened was that the Holy Michael Foundation awarded $15,000 to the refugee ministry here at St. Michael's, which means this can become a sustainable ministry going forward. Eventually, I mean, obviously, right now things are difficult with the time we're in, but eventually we'll look at taking on more refugees. But for now, can you tell us what are the needs as we are a circle of welcome, but we've in some ways kind of become the circle of support. What are the needs right now for this family?
I'll just begin by quickly saying that we would love for people who have committed themselves to continue their commitment. That's really important. But there are other things too.
Usually, by this time, working with refugees after 1 year, the family is able to be fairly independent and not need a lot of help. But in this case, because of the only one parent and lack of language, we will be there for a while supporting this family till they become totally independent. And now the mother has been laid off from her job. If Carol's Kitchen reopens, it's a training program it's like a perfect fit for her. But until that happens, St. Michael's, we will keep assisting her with rent. And so all donations to the current refugee fund for this family would be appreciated. And the mother's, even when the mother is working, her salary's not going to be very much for quite a while. So we're looking for families that have boys a little bit bigger than her boys to sort of start a trail of hand-me-down clothes to these children for maybe a few years.
We're blessed in many ways here at this church to be able to be in this position to do this sort of ministry. Thank you all so very much. Now, if anyone would like to help or contribute, I imagine they can get in touch with you.
The specific email address is kathybob100@aol.com, KATHYBOB100@aol.com. And Kathy's phone number, who's the central switchboard, is 252-216-8239.
God bless you all.